Welcome and thank you for joining us at the conversation presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. My name is Paul Grondahl. I'm the director of the Writers Institute. And before I introduce today's guest, John Gray, let me remind you that all of these author interviews can be found on the Writers Institute YouTube channel, and we also archive them there so you can watch them at your convenience. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and find out everything going on with our programming at our website, nyswritersinstitute.org. Finally, if you like this programming and want to support it in the future, you can go to our website and make a donation. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, just a few words about John Gray. He's perhaps best known as the anchor of WTEN TV in Albany, and he's also an Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist. He's a columnist for Capital Region Living, and also the author of 3 popular children's books, God Needed a Puppy, Keller's Heart, and Sweet Polly Petals. Now he has published his first novel, Manchester Christmas, with Paraclete Press, which we'll talk about today. I wanted to mention a fantastic blurb testimonial you got from the great Richard Paul Evans, author of the #1 best-selling book, The Christmas Box, and here's what he had to say about Manchester Christmas. Sweet, romantic, and suspenseful, Manchester Christmas is an unexpected gift. Thank you for joining us, John. It's good to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Paul.
So you've written, we've been in the same kind of toiled in the same vineyards as journalists and
Sure.
writing columns. I know you've written hundreds or thousands. What was it about the novel that you decided now to tackle it, or you didn't want to try to take on a novel before this?
Well, everybody, when you're a writer of any kind, you know this. Everybody says to you, "Oh, you write all the time. You should write a book. You should write a book." And they don't understand. You don't just sit and write a book. Number one. Number two, it's daunting. And I can't be the only person who's ever written a book who thought this. I thought, well, what can I? First of all, can I do it? Second of all, will it be good? Third of all, even if I do it and it's pretty good, will anybody want to publish it? Because if I do all this work, it's not like writing a short story or an essay or something where, you go, well, I put a whole weekend into that and nothing happened with it. With a book, you're talking about months of work. And if nobody wants to buy it, then you say, well, I wrote it for an audience of one, I guess, me. And it's an awful lot of, it'd be like saying to somebody, well, why don't you build a motorcycle? But at the end, when you go to turn the key, it might not run, So I always thought when I was retired someday I would do it, but I had an idea. And then sometimes, I don't know, just the spirit hits you where you're like, I think I'm going to sit and just start.
Right.
And I can always stop. I can always say, you know what, I was right. This isn't working out. I'm getting out and pull the ripcord and get out. But, I started, and then I sort of liked where it was going. And it took a while, but I figured out about halfway through, I said, I think I can do this. I think I can at least finish it.
You credit your wife, Courtney. You have a great partner in her. She seemed to kind of urge you on and cheer you on and encourage you. What role did she play in this?
She kept saying, you got to write a book someday. And I'd say, yeah, I will. And, I've written children's books, but those are different. Those I wrote in a few days. And finally I said, I think I want to try. And she said, good, and she said, I'll leave you alone. Which was, if you have a spouse, and whether you have you write books or you refinish furniture or you have a hobby, if you have a spouse who says, I know you love to do that, so go ahead, I'm not going to drive you crazy saying, are you doing that again today? Or she didn't do that stuff. Luckily our shifts too are different, where I work nights, so a lot of times she was at work during the day, so I was able to do it where it didn't take away from our time. Because when you do that with a marriage where you're on different shifts, the weekends are kind of when you can see each other. So I tried to write around that where I wasn't taking time away from the marriage. But she would always say, how's it going? What chapter you on? What's happening in the story? Right. And so she kept encouraging me to keep going. And I remember telling her one day, I didn't even know how, this is how naive I was. I literally Googled how long should a book be? Because I've read a million books, but I couldn't tell you. If you gave me $100 and said, how many words was in The Client from John Grisham? I'd say, I don't know, 100,000, 50,000. I Googled how long a book should be, and it said typically 60 to 100,000 words is, and I was like, can I write that much? I've only written a couple thousand words in my life and at a time. And that way, and then literally once I got about 20, I didn't count the words, and I got quite a ways in, and I literally cut and paste from one of those boxes on, word count.
Yep.
And it was like 23,000 words. I thought, well, I've got a lot of story left and I've got 23,000 words. I think I can do this, So it was kind of funny.
I was amazed at your discipline. You talked about, I think you started in January and finished Memorial Day, which is less than 6 months, I think. Did you just go at it so many pages a day? Did it feel at all like, writing a column? I know you write a column, I write a column, probably like 1,000 words. Were you just figuring it in little sprints like that, or how did you do it?
You know what? I give credit to Norman Rockwell, and I'll tell you why. I went over there to his museum probably 10 years ago. I'm not much for tours because I always feel like when you go on a tour, you're sort of trapped in the tour. I like to wander on my own. But I was wandering around that day and I was eavesdropping on the tour. I got the best of both worlds. I could walk away from the tour if I wanted to, but I could listen when she was giving away good information.
Right.
And she was talking about, they have his studio there, and she was saying how he treated it as a job, that he got up a certain hour, he did his walk, he had his tea or whatever. And even if he didn't have an idea, he got in front of the easel and he'd sit there at a certain hour and say, okay, let me think, what's going on in the world? And he treated that. And I remember reading Stephen King's book On Writing, where he talked about the similar thing, where you do have to treat it sometimes like a job, where like, okay, Paul, get in the chair, get in front of even if it's not a good day, maybe something will come to you. Just try to put yourself in a position where words will come. And I promised myself when I started, I would try at least 2 days, if not 3 a week, to write for 2 hours. And that's kind of how I committed to it. But what was fun about this book, the one Manchester Christmas, was once the story started and I kind of liked the characters, I was excited to go write the next thing to see what was going to happen. And I'd get an idea on a walk and go, and then I'd want to run to the computer and start typing and say, I kind of like that, where that went.
So I'm glad you mentioned Stephen King's On Writing. That's, I think, one of the very best book on writing. I work with freshmen writing at UAlbany, and I have them read that. I mean, it's a beautiful book. Let me just give this wonderful summary on the dust jacket of the book. A young writer is drawn to a small New England town in search of meaning for her life. She encounters kindness, romance, and a mystery. Manchester Christmas shows that there is grace and healing for this wounded world. That's very well put. Did you write that? I assume you wrote that as well?
Yeah.
They
asked me to write something to describe the book, which is, it's one of the hardest things. I just finished the sequel 2 weeks ago, and the same thing happened where the publisher says, I just read your book and I really like it. Now, can you give me like 70 words that describe your entire story? And you're like, oh, brother,
Right.
It'd be like, give me 50 words on Barack Obama,
Right.
It's like, well, there's, but so that it's always tricky to sum it up.
So I know you started in radio and then moved into TV, and you've always kind of written a column on the side. Did that journalism training help in this, or was it a completely different, muscle memory or exercise?
Yeah, I think it all helps. When I talk to kids about writing, I said, if you ever watch somebody who's got a shed, like my father-in-law's got this huge garage full of stuff. And he literally, if he was fixing something, let's say he was fixing a cabinet and a little piece of wood came off with a little hole, it looks like garbage to me. He'll save that. He'll put that aside. I'll say, well, why are you saving that? He'll say, you never know. I might need a piece of wood with a hole in it that's this big someday. And I feel like the same way with us writers, where you pick stuff up along the way and you don't realize you're going to need it someday or how it might help you. And I think the journalism certainly helps you with the discipline of writing.
Right.
I don't think we're journalists. What's the line from Richard Gere from Runaway Bride? It's literature in a hurry. Journalism. In a way, it's true. It's you really have to be disciplined. There's no time for, I'm going to stare out the window and chew on my pencil like I see in movies as a writer. I'm going to go sit at Starbucks with my laptop open and take 4 hours watching people to write us. In journalism, you got to it's like, Paul, we're on deadline. You're going to get that done or not. And you go, I got it.
Right.
Boom, and you bang it out. So I think that helped in terms of the discipline. And it's true what King said in his book about on writing. He talks about, I tell this to young kids, they don't want to hear it. I said, the best thing to help you with your writing is to read. So I think all the reading I did growing up and whether it's fiction or a Harry Potter book or whatever, you don't know what it's doing for your brain, teaching you vocabulary, picking up little things with grammar. just catching little interesting things that a writer might do, say, oh, I see what you did there. That was clever.
Right.
I think it all kind of goes into the stew and helps you in a way.
I agree. It's exactly what I tell my students and young writers. But let's talk about the protagonist in Manchester Christmas. She happens to be a writer. Her name is Chase, which is an interesting name for a character, I think, because she is chasing something in a way. She's from Seattle, which is my
Yeah.
hometown, which I love. And she travels across to Manchester because she has this idea she's going to also write something. It's going to be, I mean, she's generally writing long magazine pieces, but I think she wants to kind of try something
Right.
bigger and better. So, why did you pick Manchester? Is that a place that you know really well, or
Yeah, I probably stayed close to home with a lot of what I did in this book, in terms of, be working in journalism, being a writer. I chose a writer as a protagonist because I know how writers, what they do and how they think a little bit. I love Manchester, Vermont, Arlington, Shaftesbury, Bennington. I love that whole area, and I know it well. So it was easier to write about it because I knew what I was talking about.
right?
I couldn't imagine trying to write about, like, I would never write about a scene in Seattle because even though I said she was from there, I've never been to Seattle. You could write about it in a way. And
Right.
the problem is, I would guess wrong on stuff. And if you were from there, you'd go, you know what? I really liked your story, but when you mentioned Seattle, we don't have public buses like that, or we don't have, whatever. We don't get snow at that time of year. You make mistakes that you don't realize you're making. So, but yeah, I love Manchester and I love that area. And I thought in the story, not to give too much away to people who were watching this, you know this because you read the story. She grows up kind of poor and she buys calendars as a kid when they're deeply discounted at the mall after Christmas, and she puts them on the wall. And when she gets to one, when she's a little bit older, it's all New England scenes. She gets to December and it's Manchester at Christmas time, and she just thinks it looks perfect.
Right.
And I don't really get into it that much in the story because I was trying for brevity's sake, but and I explained this to a lot of the book clubs I talked to. In my mind, she didn't have a lot growing up, but she looked at that as, but that's the ideal place. I'd love, and she was just, and she never took it off the wall. That's the one she left up, and it kind of haunted her and pulled her, like where she finally said it at 30, whatever she is. I'm kind of vague about her age.
Right.
I think I've got to go there and just see this at Christmas time. And even if it's just to say, see, it's not as good as the picture was on my wall, or maybe it's going to exceed my expectations. But yeah, I like the idea of her being drawn to there.
Yeah, you weave it in very nicely at the end with a plot resolution and things. But the other character, I mean, Manchester's kind of a wounded city at this time because a beautiful young woman, an artist, has died. And talk about, I mean, I know you're a very religious person. The religious themes come through this to me, like redemption, forgiveness, grace. Talk about why those themes were important to you.
Well, what's interesting, Paul, is a week after I started this, so I was literally on chapter 1, and I wasn't sure where the story was going. I knew she was going to help the town, but I didn't have that sketched out in my mind yet. And a week after it started, a coworker at Channel 10, where I work on TV, died at 23, and her name was Taylor Farnsworth, the same as the character in the book.
Oh, yeah.
And it really bothered. I saw it shake the whole station because she was so young and she had red hair. She was beautiful, very much an artist. She was more of a writer than a painter. But it really, something said to me, this might be for, you're seeing what it's doing to the TV station, how it's affecting everybody in a different way. Maybe this is something I could use. And I contacted her family and said, hey, I'm writing this book, and I don't know if it's going to be, if I'm going to finish it or if it's going to get published, but would you mind if I named a character? Don't trust me. She's going to be a good person in the story. She won't be like a bad person.
Right.
And they said, yeah, we'd be honored. So that's where a lot of that came from. And I didn't want to be heavy handed with the religious stuff because a lot of people are not religious in any way, but I do think everybody likes the idea of forgiveness and grace,
Right.
and redemption. My favorite story I ever read, until the day I die, will be A Christmas Carol. And what I love about Dickens is he has the main guy, Scrooge, wake up before it's too late, and he could still, help Tiny Tim. He could still help Bob Cratchit. He could still fix things with his nephew. I forget the nephew's name, but you know what I'm saying. I love the idea that it's not too late for redemption,
Right.
and for anybody, and that includes people who are sitting in prison right now, who could
Right.
still get out and do something with their lives. So I like that idea of her and her. And I thought, and in my story, in my imagining, it took an outsider to kind of come in to shake things up a little bit and help everybody.
And there's also some romance, but I would say it's definitely PG. I mean, did you purposely,
Yeah,
not include sex and sex scenes? Just what's your feeling on
yeah,
that? I mean,
yeah. I just didn't want to go down that road.
right,
I wanted to be a book that people could share with kids and older people who are just turned off by that would like it. And honestly, in my mind, when I wrote this, I thought, boy, some of these scenes would be great in a movie. I don't know if that'll ever happen someday. And that was well before anything happened with a Hollywood guy reading it. But you know, I thought to myself even back then, like, let's set yourself up that if the book does happen and it does pretty well, somebody could look at it and say this could easily be like a Hallmark type movie versus and honestly, Paul, it was a detriment because my agent sent it everywhere, and all the romance people were like, "There's not enough heat. There's not enough heat. It's too slow." Like those books have a very strict formula, and Chase and Gavin, the guy she ends up with in the story, they would have been rolling in the hay by chapter 2,
right,
and I
right,
wanted it to come off more sweet than sexy and sensual and all that stuff.
right.
It's not the story I wanted to tell.
Yeah, it does have a movie quality. There's a lot of, I mean, there's drama, there's tender scenes, there's, I won't give it away, but there's a twist of some apparitions in the church
Yeah,
windows where she lives and things. But you did have some interest. I think the film rights have been sold to, I saw in a piece to Geslinger, is that his name? Or
Brian Herzlinger. Yeah,
Herzlinger,
he's an independent film producer, director who and writer who he does a lot of stuff for Lifetime and Hallmark, that kind of thing.
right?
So he's right now he bought the rights to it because he loved the story, and he's trying to put it together now. I didn't realize it's the learning curve for me. When movies get made, he told me I had a long talk with him. He said you need three things: you need the material. You need really four things: the material, which is the book or a script. Then you need talent to attach to it. Then you need the third thing is money to make it.
Right.
And then you need somebody who wants to buy it. And everybody's looking at everybody else to jump first. Lifetime says, well, who's going to star in it? We're not going to commit to buying this thing unless you get. And then the person who they approach to star it says, well, where's it going to air? I don't want this. I don't want to take 3 months of my life and make a movie. And now it's straight to video. And the money guy's saying, you want me to give you $1 million to make a movie? You don't know who's going to star in it or where it's going to air? You're crazy. The only person who's gung ho is the writer who's already done the work of saying, here, do my story.
Exactly. So who would you, in an ideal world, who would you cast as Chase and Gavin and Taylor?
Well, it would never happen unless it was a theater release. I'm aiming for TV with this movie. It was based, personality is a lot of my wife, but she's not an actress. But I kind of had Jennifer Garner in my mind as that kind of character.
Right.
Very striking and pretty, but also strong. I feel like Jennifer Garner is one of those actresses who can play tough. Like a Hilary Swank could do it too, as you saw in some of the stuff she's done. But somebody like that it was important to me, even though I'm a guy writing a woman character, that she not be what you see on The Bachelor every week. I didn't want that. I wanted somebody who was smart, had a college degree, was a successful writer, was tough, could handle guys coming at her because she was attractive. But right in the first chapter, in the first few pages, when this Gavin character, this handsome cowboy,
right,
bats his eyes at her, and she's attracted to him. She puts him in his place. I wanted that for the character, and I thought women would appreciate that, a character who's not tee and just falling over backwards for the first handsome guy that looks their way, because I don't think that's realistic. I think women are tougher than we give them credit for.
She's also tough in talking to her agent. There's some good scenes there, kind of pressing her.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the book will be ready when it's ready. He's like, she can negotiate pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about, like I mentioned, I went to find your book at Bookhouse, and I went 3 times. It was sold out every time. This thing must have been very popular in the run up to Christmas. How's it doing in terms of its publication?
Yeah, regionally it's doing really well. It was a number one seller of any books in bookstores locally, pretty much for a lot of them, and that included national books, but I had home court advantage for that, so I had a lot of people wanting to support it and buy it. Nationally, who knows how it does. The problem when you come from a smaller publisher is getting it into bookstores. I always felt it has a pretty cover, and a nice quote from Richard Evans on the back, that if any bookstore had put it by the front counter, they would have sold it. But it's a weird world. It reminds me a little bit of I ever worked at a supermarket. People think that there's a reason why Campbell's soup is where it is on the shelf. They pay extra money, and there's a lot of placement fees, and so it's tough to break in when you're a smaller writer until you're known,
Right.
to get placed everywhere. But it's done pretty well for an independent book. It's the third printing now. It did get up in the top 100 on Amazon, around 46 at one point when it was selling a lot, which was kind of cool. That was, that's against millions of books.
Yeah, that's nice.
So, and I'm hoping the movie happens too, where then if a movie comes out nationally on a Lifetime or another network, then, my one thing, when I could care less about making money on the book with the movie rights. I know I'm a bad negotiator, but I said to the Hollywood guy, I said, the most important thing to me is, before you start that first scene, I want to say, before you put director or producer, based on a novel by John Gray. I said, that to me is the payoff versus getting a check, because then I can just say, I sat in my little room in my house in North Greenbush, New York, and made up these characters, and now they're on TV. So
right.
that to me is cool.
I like that you you give a lot of the proceeds to charity, and I want to talk about that. But I guess it was God Needed a Puppy. You had a signing at Barnes and Noble. I was just, kind of browsing in Barnes and Noble, and I'm like, look at this line. I went up to the person, like, who is this? Who's drawing this kind of crowd? It was way down the mall line. And they said, oh, John Gray. So you're like a rock star in town, I guess.
I think it's more my dogs. I bring the dogs there. So they're working with me.
Yeah, so you've got 5 dogs. Tell us about them. Some of them, I know one is blind, right? And deaf, I think.
Yeah, one's blind and deaf. That's Keller. He's sleeping right next to me right now. There's 2 of them sleeping together.
Nice.
He's blind and deaf, and he came from a shelter that I happened to be there the day he came in, and he was kind of a mess, and he was a puppy. Somebody abandoned him, and I wrote up there that Keller's Heart, the children's book, is based on him. And then I have 2 other rescues that are both deaf. One's from Oklahoma, one's from Maryland. My wife's on all these rescue sites. Don't let your spouse on any websites on the internet, on Facebook. She'll be telling you we have to adopt this cat or dog or parakeet. But and the other 2, I have German Shepherds that are just locally. They're from local breeders. So, but 5 dogs is a lot of dogs, I'll tell you that. But they all kind of get along, and they're quiet right now, which is great.
Yeah, we had to start this over because our dog Lily was barking at a delivery person. But anyway,
yeah.
Why are you drawn to sort of they're probably the lost causes that either people wouldn't take or would be hard to place at a shelter? Why are you drawn to those kind of wounded or troubled dogs?
I don't know. It's funny. I was thinking of Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones, the little guy played by Peter Dinklage. I think it's the first season where he says he's drawn to broken things and cripples and bastards, and it might have been the title of that episode. And I think there's a little bit of that in me. I always root for the underdog.
Right.
I grew up in South Troy, which is very medium income, middle class, lower middle class. I had friends on public assistance. So I came from a neighborhood where you had to kind of scrounge to get by a little bit. My family was fortunate enough that we were okay. But I saw poor kids, and I've always rooted for the underdog, whether it's literally a dog or a person who pulls himself up from their bootstraps a little bit and will put in the time and the work to get ahead in a good way. So I guess I'm always drawn to that.
Yeah, South Troy against the world.
Me,
You guys
funny.
got a lot of grit. I miss the Troy Tavern there. But
South End Tavern, yeah.
Talk about, so you went to Hudson Valley. You kind of earned your way into the journalism ranks and stuff, right?
Yeah, my family, again, they sent me to LaSalle, which is a great private school in Troy, and that took every last dime. It wasn't until I was an adult, probably my late 20s, I realized my father never drove a car that was less than 8 years old. It was
Right.
probably because he was paying for us to go to LaSalle, my brothers and I. And but when it got to college, they kind of said to me, I remember I was applying all these schools, and they sat me at the kitchen table and said, "Listen, we've done everything we could do at this point." My father was just retiring, so their income was going to drop, and they said, "You're going to have to pick up the slack and the rope now." And I said, "You got it." So because it was all my skin in the game in terms of taking loans, I decided I wanted to do it as cheap as possible, but still get a good education. And I went to Hudson Valley for 2 years, HVCC in Troy, which I could walk to from my house. And even there, I became editor of the paper because it gave me free tuition. There's always an angle. I tell kids, if you look around, there's if you want to do the work, there's always somebody who'll say, if you'll do this, I'll give you that.
Right.
And then when I went to SUNY Oswego after that, because that was, I'd gotten into Syracuse to transfer, and UMass and some other big schools, but I looked at what they cost. This is not a knock on schools at all. Boston College might have been another one. I forget. Now B or BC, I forget which one I got into, but I looked at the price and thought, I think if I work hard, I could get a degree at a SUNY school and still land okay. And I went to Oswego. Once I went there, that I've never been to Oswego. It's around Lake Ontario.
Yep.
I mean, talk about a living brochure. The minute you step off the bus, you're like, I want to go to school here, because it's like perfect, And
Right.
and I went there, but again, I was an RA and I worked in the cafeteria to pay my way. So I paid my way through college, which only made me want to work harder to get my first job in radio and eventually TV and newspapers.
Exactly. And talk about, I saw in an interview, you had I think it was a middle school teacher that was the first one that really encouraged your
Yeah.
writing. Talk about that person and how much that meant to you.
David Kissick, his name was. He was an English teacher at LaSalle. I had his 7th, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. And right after I graduated, he went to Lansingburg, became a teacher, then eventually, I think, the principal. He just retired a few years back. Still in touch with him. Still sends me notes once in a while. He pulled me aside when I was about 13, and I thought I was in trouble. I'd written something in class in 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade. I think it was 8th. And he said, "I want you to go to the cafeteria. They sell folders for a nickel. That with little flaps." I said, "Why?" He said, "Don't ask me why, just go get the folder." And so I went and got it and came back to him. And he took my paper, and it was an A. And he said, I've had 1,000 kids come through. He goes, you write in a different way. He goes, "I think you could do something with this if you really want to pursue it." And I'd never had a teacher. I was, I loved playing football, but I wasn't going to be the quarterback. I like basketball, but I wasn't going to make the team.
Right.
So this is the first time at like 13, 14 years old, I had somebody who I admired say, you're good at this. And then it was like, really, I know I like to do it, but I didn't realize I was good. And sometimes having somebody who you respect say you're good at this, it opens the possibilities in your mind. I mean, teachers have that power. And I put it in there. And I tell people though, and I tell kids now, I go, but the curse of that was after that, every paper I turned in, he was harder on me than the other kids. I still have the folder somewhere in my basement here. He'd circle things and write, "Lazy, you're better than this. Now, this is good, more of this." But he was tougher on me. And I remember one day I said, I got an A-. He got a B+, but I read his paper. Mine's a lot better. He said, but he goes, that's him hitting a home run. He said, "This is a double for you, He said, "You can do better than this. You might." He goes, "I can tell when you wrote it on the bus on the way to school versus sitting at home really writing it."
Nice.
So, but he was a great teacher, and I acknowledge him in the book. And he keeps telling me to stop acknowledging him publicly. He's sick of people calling and saying, "Hey, John Gray keeps talking about you." But I said, "Hey, buddy, you earned it." So
you're still a Troy guy through and through. What is it about Troy? I mean, this capital region has a lot of great places and is sprawling, but Troy seems to have a certain spirit about it.
yeah, there's something about Troy, and especially the South End. My wife is she's from Loudonville, and she's met a few South Troy people. She goes, "What is it about you people?" I said, "What it is," I said, "is I feel like there's a bond there growing up in Troy." And it's probably true of a lot of places like the South Side of Chicago or Southie in Boston, or there's probably neighborhoods in Seattle where you're from, where, if you were on the other side of the world and you saw somebody in trouble and said, "Yeah, that guy, he's in trouble. He's from Troy, New York," you'd get up and walk over and say, "You say you're from Troy? Here's some money, let me help you." There's a bond there with people from your hometown, and especially so in Troy. I don't know. it's funny growing up there. Kids growing up there when I was younger wouldn't even cross the river. Like going to Albany or going to Watervliet to go get a beer was like, going to Egypt or something. Like, I don't want to cross the river. It's funny how people are such hometown people.
Right. So you write, I mean, I've read your columns for years and this book as well. I mean, you really get a lot of emotion and kind of writing from the heart. Who are your writing heroes in terms of novelists and
Well, I loved Dickens when I was younger. A lot of it was over my head, but I enjoyed reading him. And then you hit school and there's no time to read. I remember when I got out of college, I was really excited to just read. And I went through probably 30 of Stephen King's books, and then I went on to Grisham, and then I found other writers like Tim Green, who writes a lot of thrillers, and Dean
yeah,
Koontz. And I always went for more suspenseful. It's funny. I think I've changed though, because I was trying to watch a movie called Doctor Sleep by King, which I think he wrote with his son, and I'm assuming it's right out of the book. But they were torturing a kid, and I shut the movie off. I didn't want to see it. I said, "Boy, I become a wimp in my old age." I go, I probably wouldn't have flinched at that when I was 25, but now yeah, anybody who could pull me into a world. I've never read the Harry Potter books, and I hear they're great for that. I'll have to at some point sit and read them
right.
because I hear she's a very good writer.
Yeah.
But I think Anne Rice, I read some of her stuff. So anyone who can kind of take me to a world I've never been before, enjoy reading.
So you're working on, you had mentioned you're working on a sequel to Manchester Christmas right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same character. The Hollywood guy, Brian Herzlinger, and the publisher both really like the character and the story. And they said, could there be a sequel or like a trilogy? And I said, sure. I kind of wrote it with that in mind, that this was a launch point. And the sequel has the same character and the same guy she's with and her dog. But that's it. They're in a new city with a new adventure and a whole new twist on things. So I was thinking about setting it in Cape Cod, and the Hollywood guy said, I love what you're doing. If it was the first book, he said, but it's too New Englandy over there. He goes, it's going to feel like the same book. He said, he goes, I'm telling you, he goes, I'm telling you, I do this for a living. You want to keep the same main characters and put them in new situations that don't feel exactly the same,
Right.
which is hard, because if you write a book, if you write fiction and you like the characters you create, you want to stay with them.
Right.
I really understand showrunners who do a TV show, like a Boardwalk Empire or Sopranos or whatever, where they must love these characters and hate to even kill one off, let alone saying, okay, do a whole new series and lose all those people that you built up. But it was a challenge, but it was fun too to create new characters.
Where are you going to set it then? Have you settled on it? You must have settled on it.
Yeah. It's the main character, Chase Harrington, from the first book, and her boyfriend Gavin. The book opens up in Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Okay.
And you learn early on in the book that this book, I won't give away the ending at all, but the book we were talking about, Manchester, ends with her telling her agent she's going to write a book about her experience in Manchester.
Yep.
She writes the book. It becomes, by kind of a fluke, it becomes a runaway success. But then, because of events that happen in town, a lot of strangers start showing up looking for her to help them, and she can't help them. So she kind of has to get out of Dodge for a while, and she goes down to Manhattan and lives above a coffee shop that's full of interesting characters. And a lot of things happen I won't get into. Maybe you and I talk about it a year from now.
Yeah.
If you have me back on. But yeah, it's got a similar vibe where she meets interesting, kind people.
Right.
And she's put in a position again where information is coming to her in a strange way, which different than what happened in Manchester, but similar in that way, where in an odd way, somebody's helping her to help other people, which
Right.
I like that idea.
And Scooter, the dog, is with her. That's a key character.
Scooter is with her. Yes,
Nice.
He is absolutely with her.
Is
gotta
second...
have the dog in there. That he's based.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, is the second one easier at all after you've done one, or is it just as hard?
It should have been, but I didn't know what I was doing the first time, and I really colored inside the lines, and because I knew what I was doing a little bit, and I knew I could do it before I wrote a single word because I'd done it once. I sort of said, okay, well, let's. I felt like who's that guy? Bob Ross, who does the paintings, on TV with the big hair.
Right.
Like, well, I'm going to add. I'm not just going to do a lake with trees. I'm going to add a dock, and I'm going to add a fisherman, and I'm going to add a little shed. So I made it more complicated, layered, and I was very proud of myself until I really got into the story and realized This is harder because I've added more wrinkles to my story that have to tie together. And I really was more persnickety, if that's a word, about going back over it and catching things. The book clubs are very good for me because some people in book clubs are very honest. They'll say, I love your book. I did want to point out, and then they'll say, and it could be something like, I'm looking at you, you look like you're wearing a shirt with a collar and a black t-shirt.
Yep.
You may wear that today, you might wear that. They'd say, I noticed the character Paul always had a black t-shirt on under his shirt. Why was that? Because you made a point. And I'd go, I don't know, did I do that? I didn't realize I did that. And they go, yeah, you did. And I go, oh geez, that was an accident. So they get in your head a little bit where you're like, okay, I gotta. So to answer your question, I'm taking too long, but it should have been done in 5 months again. And I started in July. It really should have been done by Christmas. That was my goal. I just finished in February because I was really going over it again and again to tighten it. It was probably 15,000 more words than I wanted it to land. So I really went through with a hatchet and was mean to myself and saying, okay, let's really go through these sentences and keep the story moving and get rid of stuff, killing your darlings, as I say.
Yep.
And so I trimmed about 6,000 words of the 15,000 I was over.
Wow.
And now it's with the publisher. So the editor may come back and say, hey, could we tighten this or that? And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. You're not going to quit your day job. We'll still watch you on TV on WWN.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say if one of these books really took off and I could just do this, I would just do it. But I felt more like a writer with the second book, where I said to my wife in January, are you okay? I go, yeah. I got to get this book done. I go, the first book, I loved the characters and didn't want to leave. This one, I felt like they were holding me hostage a little bit towards the end. I was like, I got to finish this book because
right.
I felt like the characters are going, excuse me, you didn't address my problems. You got to come talk to me now. And I'll get to you in a second, lady at the counter in the coffee shop, And I felt like I was doing that with the story over and over again, where I was like, at some point you have to just, let it go. I'm sure every painter's felt the same way with a painting, where like, are you done with that yet? Go, a little more yellow there.
And I really like how you give back, and you've got a huge following on Facebook, tens of thousands of followers, because you're authentic and you're not mean-spirited, you're open-hearted. But what causes do you support? Because I know you give a lot of the proceeds of your books to what are the causes close to your heart?
Yeah, the first two children's books all went to animal shelters, and I lost track after about $30,000 had been donated to about 60 or 70 shelters around the country. That was a lot of fun because as money would come in, I was taking chunks of it and just sending it. And initially it was probably 30 or 40 dog shelters. And then things started popping up where I put on Facebook and people say, well, there's wildfires, like there's this sanctuary that has all these horses that got left. And I sent money there. That somebody sent me one saying there's little bear cubs in Maine who get abandoned. There's a place that takes them in. And I sent them some money. So there's been some really cool charities that people buying the books have helped because I gave the money away. And the third book, Sweet Polly Petals, I'm just got my first check from it because it came out in the fall, and I did a few $100s to that one's helping the homeless shelter. So I'm hoping nothing will make me happier than selling 1 million books and giving $1 million away. That's really what I would love to see someday. But we'll see where it goes. But and this book, the novel, because that young lady had died at work and one of the characters named after her, I set up a scholarship for her name at Shenandoah. And I didn't know how many books I'd sell. So I told them, why don't we start at $1,000 every May? I'll give to a kid who wants to go to college for writing or painting or something in theater, something in the arts. And that's all set up. I sent them their first check. So that's all set for this May. I told them to pick the kid. I said, my only criteria, because you can be as involved or not involved with a scholarship. I didn't know all this, but I said, you guys pick them. You guys know these kids. I don't go to Shen. I said, but what I don't want, please don't think I'm being rude. What I don't want is the 4.0 who does everything perfect in their life. I go, give me a B- student who tries really hard, who's got a really good heart.
Right.
That's the kid I want to give the grand to, because the money will probably mean more to that kid than some person who's literally been at the top of their class their entire life and has choices of scholarships and what, and there's not, God bless him for being that an overachiever, but I think I'm more I'd rather the blue collar kid who's,
Yeah, we
sometimes the
share a
blue
lot in
collar dude.
common. I'm a
Yeah,
blue collar kid too. My dad was a postal carrier and first one in my
yeah,
family to graduate from college and stuff. You do appreciate it more when you got to hustle. I had a bunch of jobs as well and work study and I know what you're talking about, but I think it's great that you are donating this money, which is a lot of writers don't, it's commendable. I do want to talk briefly about social media because you have this huge
yeah.
presence. I don't know if you're on Twitter as much, but Facebook, I mean, you put something up and you'll get hundreds of comments. How do you manage it, make time for it? Obviously, it gives you a platform that, you sell out, your books sell out. Like you said, you're known around here and you're on the TV, but in what other way is it a positive force and a negative? Because it's been twisted and used for some terrible purposes too.
Yeah, I didn't want a Facebook page 10 years ago, but I kept resisting. And then finally my boss called me at the TV station and said, "You're not understanding what we're saying. So I'm just going to say it. You don't have a choice. You have to have a page." So I started a page and I just posted news stories. And then I sort of looked at it and there was actually an actor I was following named Jim Beaver, who's a character actor in shows like Deadwood, Supernatural. You'd know him if you saw him. He's one of those character actors.
Right.
Old guy. He always plays the cowboy with the beard. But and I became a fan of his page, and I realized number one, it was really him posting. Number two, he really answered people which takes time. And number three, he gave a little bit of himself away, and that's what made the page interesting. It wasn't like a typical fan page for somebody. So I said, well, if I'm going to do this, do it, So I started modeling my page almost after his, where I said, I'm going to let people in, not entirely into my life, need some privacy, but I started sharing more things that were more personal. And that's what people connected to, because all the other news sites and news people were, look at this story, look at that story. This was more like something like, well, dumb things like I put coffee on the roof of the car and I got down 787 and realized I reached for my coffee, it wasn't there. So, and then people, oh my God, I did the same thing with my lunch. I did this. And then you get people, I also keep it very positive. Like literally in 2020, I didn't have the words Trump or Cuomo on my page if I could help it ever, because it wouldn't matter what either one of them did. It was so polarizing. And unfortunately, I had to stay away from a lot of that stuff. And I don't allow trolls to do their thing there. First I give people the benefit of the doubt, or maybe they're angry, or I try to private message them. Like, could you not, I saw you were commenting back and forth with this guy, and then you made a comment about his looks, and that's not really cool. And then I got to a point where I was like, you can't reason with trolls. I'm just, if they're, I tell people up front, be nice to each other. If somebody goes out of their way to be mean to somebody, I just take them off the page, and people could say, well, what about free speech? I'm like, well, they have a free speech, but you can't go on somebody's private page and just be deliberately hurtful to people. I'm not going to allow it. So it's cultivated a community there of nice people, pretty much, which people, it's a safe space for people where they go. I know that term gets overused, but I feel like they can go there and just, I'll share a nice song I heard on the radio or something nice. And I think they like that.
Yeah. I mean, you are, I'm glad we're finally meeting. We've never really crossed paths that much, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
And I look forward to doing something in person when we're able to, but the book is Manchester Christmas.
I love that.
It's sold out all over the capital region. Hopefully you can find a copy. It's not just a holiday book. It's a heartwarming story with a beautiful message about redemption and hope and reclaiming something that's been wounded and lost, and a real page turner. It's a great book. We look forward to the sequel and maybe the movie one day, John. That would be great.
Yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Thanks so much, Paul. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in person when we get beyond this pandemic.
Same here. So it's John Gray. The novel is Manchester Christmas by Paraclete Press. You can find it online. You can find it at your independent bookseller, wherever books are sold. Thanks again, John.